Let me start with two main tenets. First of all, India is maybe the one country in the world where you have all the great religions represented. And of course, there is a predominance in numbers of the Hindu religion. But let us not forget that India is also the country with the third largest Muslim population in the world. So it's not just a negligible minor population, even though one part of the subcontinent had sort of been separated as a Muslim state. And it follows in a way logically that if one part of India was sort of broken away as a Muslim state, and Pakistan also calls herself a Muslim state after all, Islamic state, that the rest of India could not possibly be a monolithic Hindu state, because there were all the other great religions present: Buddhism, Christianity, Jainism, Sikhism, and they had, as Rajmohan pointed out, they had their home in India, and they were not strangers to India. I forgot the Jews, who also had a history in India after all. India has another tradition, which is maybe twofold. On the one hand, of course, whenever religious groups live together, very often some sort of controversies and difficulties arose between the groups. But on the other hand, India, I think, was a prime example where religions also coexisted in a very productive way. And for example, if we look at the Mughal Empire, there were many ministers and important persons who were in fact Hindus, and they were not forced to convert, but they could keep their religion, even though you might say that I would say the Abrahamic religions, that is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, are in their nature maybe less tolerant than Hinduism is. But you had a coexistence between the different subcultures, so to say, to form a very specific Indian culture, which is manifested in many different aspects, which exhibit both the Muslim and the Hindu, and to a lesser degree, of course, the traditions of the other religions. If we think of the two men who are sort of are the guiding leaders in the religious question also, Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji, we have to observe that both of these men were very devout in their religion. They were both devout Hindus, but in their very nature of being devout Hindus, I think they were also open to other religions. And I think neither of them sort of had any doubts about his own roots as a Hindu, but equally they were open to all the other religions present in India and of course throughout the world. And I think there is no intrinsic doubt that this is possible. In a way, I would almost say, if you are convinced of your own religious roots, so to say, it is easier not to be defensive, but to be open to other religions and to realize that these are all different ways towards the same end. I'm very happy that we have this session today, because I think it's an expression that all of us who are participating today are disturbed by the fact that India, under the recent leadership, has not lived up to these principles that Netaji and Gandhiji certainly stood for, that in a way, in recent years, there was even an emphasis on the differences that arose between religious groups. And even though we may say that to some extent the division of India into at first 3 states, 2 states, now 3 states, followed religious lines and to some extent was enacted by the British Empire, we also have to admit that they certainly had enough Indians who sort of went along with that. And I think most of us probably feel most deeply disturbed and shamed by the fact what happened when India became partitioned. I think neither, Gandhiji had to live through this trauma, and he was deeply upset, and to some extent he was able in some areas to alleviate the worst or even worse effects than what took place. I think Netaji, you might say in some ways, was lucky that he did not live through that, because he had always stood for the cooperation and coexistence and mutual respect of the different religious groups. And I think the INA was a clear example of that, where he got people of different backgrounds work together, respect each other, celebrate their respective religious festivals together, share their meals, even though those who came from the British Indian Army had experienced a different background. I mean, there they had their tea and their different meals, not together with the members of other religious groups, but separated, and there was no Hindu tea and Christian tea and Muslim tea, but they sort of worked together as Indians and as brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, we find that the attitude that was held by those people who eventually sort of participated or tolerated a bloodbath between Indians of different religious background had a very negative effect on their country. And the two countries that sort of were at loggerheads for many years, I think, lost a lot in the process of how they went about celebrating their differences. If we look at these two countries, India and Pakistan, and Bangladesh to some extent, we find they have spent a lot of effort and a lot of economic resources on the controversies they had with each other. And I think they might have been better off not getting the nuclear bomb, but investing more in healthcare and in education, and maybe a peaceful coexistence. The fact that what is sort of the larger part of the subcontinent, that is India as such, is sort of emphasizing religious differences again now, I think is a very wasteful development, and we unfortunately find a very similar attitude in other countries. I mean, the United States, of course, have experienced a wave of hate and discrimination and differences, particularly under the previous president. And in other countries, we find the same thing, even if in the most recent international conflict that is the war in the Ukraine. Ultimately, it is a divide not along religious but along ethnic lines, but it's a very similar phenomenon that countries try to sort of mobilize and instigate trouble along lines of religion or ethnic differences. And ultimately, it is maybe to cover up their own inability to work for the welfare of their own people. So I think if we look at both what Mahatma Gandhi and what Netaji taught their fellow countrymen and countrywomen at the time, and we take a lesson from that, at least we can sort of take a small step opposing these tendencies of hate and divisiveness, which unfortunately harm India and harm many other countries in this world as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Now let's hear Professor Sugata Bose.
Very much, Dr. Raziuddin, for the invitation, Sri Tripathi for your introduction, Rajmohanji and my dear aunt Anita have certainly lightened my burden. In February 2014, the American civil rights leader, Reverend Jesse Jackson, came to visit Netaji Bhavan, the historic house from which Netaji had escaped in January 1941, driven by his nephew, my father, Shishir Kumar Bose. After my mother, Krishna Bose, and I had shown Jesse Jackson round the museum, he wrote a simple and powerful message in the visitor's book that captured the essence of the inspiration that freedom-loving peoples across the world can take from India. He wrote, "Gandhi plus Bose equals liberation." Confusing majoritarianism with democracy and uniformity with unity, the current regime in India runs the risk of turning its back on the best traditions of Indian anti-colonial nationalism, as it behaves more and more like its colonial predecessor, drawing upon and on occasion reenacting colonial-era lawless laws. It seeks to extract the allegiance of India's diverse populace through coercive control from the center, thereby provoking greater alienation instead of nurturing a sense of belonging to the Indian Union. It is in this context of an erosion of political ethics that life as message of both Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose acquires renewed salience. Just as Gandhian values cannot be reduced to a cleanliness campaign, extolling Netaji's military heroism sounds hollow if divorced from his unequivocal commitment to equality and religious harmony. Both exemplary lives need to be rescued from vacuous state propaganda and the distortions of fake history. On his visit to Bengal in December 1945, Gandhiji paid homage to Subhash in the bedroom of this Elgin Road home from where I am speaking and from where Netaji had made his great escape in 1941. Gandhiji was in Medinipur on January 3rd, 1946, when news came that the Red Fort Three, who had been sentenced to deportation for life 3 days ago, had been released. These Hindu, Muslim, and Sikh soldiers of freedom came from Punjab, but the INA had also undermined the British separation of martial and non-martial races and had large numbers of Tamils in its ranks. On February 10th, 1946, Gandhiji decided to revive his journal, Harijan, after a gap of 3.5 years. One of his first articles, published on February 12th, addressed the question of unity. Netaji's name, he wrote, is one to conjure with. His patriotism is second to none. His bravery shines through all his actions. The lesson that Netaji and his army brings to us is one of self-sacrifice, unity, irrespective of class and community, and discipline. Netaji, Gandhiji told military men who came to visit him in Uruli Kanchan in March 1946, had rendered a signal service to India by giving the Indian soldier a new vision and a new ideal. The Mahatma initially harbored a hope that Netaji would return to join him in the work for unity. On March 30th, 1946, Gandhiji explained in the Harijan his earlier feeling that Netaji could not leave us until his dreams of Swaraj had been fulfilled. He now could no longer rely on, quote, such unsupported feeling, unquote, as there was, quote, strong evidence to counteract the feeling, unquote. In the face of these proofs, the Mahatma wrote, I appeal to everyone to forget what I have said, and believing in the evidence before them, to reconcile themselves to the fact that Netaji has left us. All man's ingenuity is as nothing before the might of the one God. He alone is truth, and nothing else stands. The ideal of unity that Netaji had instilled in his followers remained alive. Abid Hassan beautifully portrayed the character of the army of liberation to which he belonged. What a group we were, and ours was but a unit among many of its kind in our army. I felt proud that I belonged to it. Every region in India was represented, and every religion and every caste mixed inseparably together, not only in bigger formations, but even in small platoons and sections, each unit being a living tribute to the unity of India. We had our different private faiths, we had our different languages, but in our purpose and in our political belief, we were a well-knit, determined, and indivisible whole. Once they reached Mandalay after their retreat from Imphal, Netaji came to meet them. The Sikhs oiled their beards, the Punjabi Muslims, the Dogras and Rajputs twirled their moustaches, and we, the indiscriminates, Abid Hassan said, put on as good a face as we could manage. As Netaji spoke to them, their weariness seemed to depart, and they felt refreshing new blood circulating in their veins. Abid Hassan understood the essence of his leadership. He was all we had, our leader, to whom each one of us, however humble, meant something, and who to us all meant everything. He belonged to us all of the Azad Hind movement, and entirely without any compromise. Abid Hassan then flashed back to October 1943 to illustrate the meaning of without any compromise by telling the story of Netaji's visit to the Chettiar temple in Singapore. He had turned away the head priest, saying, "What? Come to your temple, where even Hindus of other castes are not permitted entry, not to speak of members of other communities who are equally near and dear to me?" He agreed to go when the high priest returned with an invitation to an Indian national demonstration. When we came to the temple, Abid Hassan remembered, I found it filled to capacity with the uniforms of the INA officers and men and the black caps of South Indian Muslims glaringly evident. The memory I retain, he said, of Netaji's speech is one of an invigorating music as that of a symphony dedicated to the unity of the motherland. In April 1946, Gandhiji visited INA prisoners in the Kabul lines and the Red Fort of Delhi. He was told that they had never felt any distinction of creed or religion in the INA. But here we are faced with Hindu tea and Muslim tea, they complained. Why do you suffer it? Gandhiji asked. No, we don't, they said. We mix Hindu tea and Muslim tea exactly half and half and then serve. The same with food. That is very good, exclaimed Gandhiji, laughing. Over time, Gandhiji had moved closer to Netaji's philosophy of cultural intimacy among India's diverse communities. He was also nostalgic about the euphoria of the common political struggle a quarter of a century ago. The Ali brothers and I used to go all over the country together like blood brothers, he recalled on April 6, 1946. We spoke with one voice and we delivered the message of Hindu-Muslim unity and Swaraj to the masses. The climax of the joint movement had been reached in Delhi, where Swami Shraddhanand addressed a gigantic gathering of Hindus and Muslims in the Jama Masjid. It was a glorious day in India's history, Gandhiji declared, the memory of which we shall always treasure. The remembrance of the early 1920s Satyagraha and the example Netaji's ayane became recurring features of his discourses on unity. You have achieved a complete unity among the Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, Christians, Anglo-Indians, and Sikhs in your ranks, Gandhiji told 60 senior ayane officers who came to see him in Shimla in May 1946. That was no mean achievement outside India, and he urged them to keep that spirit of unity alive under Indian conditions. Based in Noakhali, from November 1946 onwards, Gandhiji consistently argued in favor of provincial rights. He admitted that Subhash Bose had been right in contending in 1939 that Assam was a special case and that the Gopinath Bardoloi ministry should not resign along with the other provincial governments. We look to the Congress, Gandhiji pointed out, and then we feel that if we do not follow it slavishly, something will go wrong with it. I have said that not only a province, but even an individual can rebel against the Congress, and by doing so, save it. The Mahatma had come a long way from imposing the discipline of the High Command on provincial units. Between January 7th and March 2nd, 1947, Mahatma Gandhi undertook a 116-mile pilgrimage on foot through 47 villages of Noakhali and Tipera. Manu Gandhi sang his favorite hymn, Vaishnava Janato, at the early morning prayers on the day he set out on his journey. At Bapu's suggestion, the word Vaishnava would be occasionally replaced with Muslim and Isahi during the singing of the chorus lines. At Dolta, on January 23rd, the Chaudharis of the village gifted him the plot of land on which his prayer meeting was held. He was glad that on the auspicious birthday of Netaji, he had received this gift and had the privilege of staying at the home of a scheduled caste friend, Rai Mohan Mali. He reminded his audience that Netaji was an Indian first and last, and that he fired all under him with the same zeal, so that they forgot in his presence all distinctions and acted as one man. Subhash had in his life verified the saying of Tulsidas that all becomes right for the brave. Gandhiji insisted that he had acted as a true Hindu in his efforts to befriend the Muslims. To his critics, he cited Iqbal's famous line, "Mazhab nahi sikhata, aapas mein bair rakhna." In both Noakhali and Bihar, his motto was do or die. Once August 15th, 1947 was set as the date for independence, Gandhiji expressed his desire to spend that day in Noakhali. Once he reached Bengal, he abandoned his plan of going to Noakhali on August 11th to work for the return of sanity to Calcutta, this premier city of India. Ignoring the celebrations in New Delhi, Gandhiji chose to spend Independence Day fasting and praying with those who were poor and obscure. Peace and camaraderie reigned in Calcutta on August 15, 1947. In an editorial titled Miracle or Accident on August 16th, Gandhiji narrated how Hindus were taken to masjids and Muslims to mandirs at the dawn of freedom, and both communities chanted Jai Hind in unison. It was neither miracle nor accident, but the willingness of human beings to dance to God's tune. We have drunk the poison of mutual hatred, Gandhiji wrote, and so this nectar of fraternization tastes all the sweeter, and the sweetness should never wear out. On January 12, 1948, Mahatma Gandhi announced his momentous decision to start an indefinite fast to try and bring about a reunion of hearts among all communities. His reward would be regaining India's dwindling prestige and her fast-fading sovereignty over the heart of Asia and there through the world. As he commenced his fast, "When I survey the wondrous cross" was sung, followed by recitations from the Quran and the Guru Granth Sahib and Hindu devotional songs. This was no ordinary fast. It was designed to avert a catastrophe that was overtaking the subcontinent and to assert that no one had a right to say India belonged to only the majority community and the minority community can only remain there as the underdog. He broke the fast to the chanting and singing of an eclectic range of Japanese, Muslim, Parsi, Christian, and Hindu scriptures and hymns, and the recitation of the ancient mantra, Om Asatoma Sadgamaya, Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya, Mrittorma Amritam Gamaya. Lead me from untruth to truth, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. The final week of the Mahatma's life was rich with symbolism redolent of India's unity. On January 23rd, 1948, Gandhiji was very glad to take note of Subhash's birthday. Subhash, according to the Mahatma, knew no provincialism nor communal differences and had in his brave army men and women drawn from all over India without distinction and evoked affection and loyalty, which very few have been able to evoke. In memory of that great patriot, he called upon his countrymen to cleanse their hearts of all communal bitterness. January 26th was Independence Day for Gandhiji's generation. Let us permit ourselves to hope, he said on that occasion, that though geographically and politically India is divided into two, at heart we shall ever be friends and brothers, helping and respecting one another, and be one for the outside world. Today, India has need of both the saint and the warrior, and their shared message of unity that is respectful of India's myriad differences. Let us also note that there were qualities of the warrior in the saint and that of the saint in the warrior. To rediscover Netaji today in proper historical context, it is essential to heed the Mahatma's call to banish religious bigotry. To rediscover Gandhiji, we need to recall the genuine reverence that Netaji showed towards the father of our nation. Jai Hind.
So very stirring messages both from Anita ji and from Shugato. So thank you very much for these powerful messages. One point that Anita ji made, which I think needs a little discussion and reflection about the great violence that took place in the tragedy of trauma 47. But I think the point that needs to be recognized is that despite that tremendous tragedy and then the assassination of Gandhiji, somehow for the next 30, 40, 50 years, not in a perfectly satisfactory way at all, but in many ways, India did not only produce this amazing constitution of equality and of equal protection for everybody, but also practiced to a fair extent some kind of democracy, some kind of protection of equal rights. So for some time, India's democracy was a kind of hope-giving example to many parts of the world. And so there is a notable change in the last few years. So I just wanted to make that comment that the killings of 47, which were, of course, I mean, there's no word to describe that carnage, but the recovery from that and the launching of India as a pluralist state with equal rights for all, a state committed to protect everybody and give equal rights was a tremendous development in the world, which I felt is worth remembering and underlining.
You have taken us forward in time, and yes, I think there are certainly very major changes that have taken place in recent times. There is a global rise of right-wing authoritarianism that both you, Rajmohanji, and Anita Auntie have referred to, and India has been no exception. In fact, I see some very major commonalities between the rise of white nationalism in the United States and Hindu nationalism in India. And even in Europe, there's going to be an election in France, and there are very worrying trends there of the rise of a kind of virulent form of racism. And so in some ways, these resorts to majoritarianism are some sort of I feel, a last gasp reaction against the democratization of these societies and polities. But even though we have moved forward in time, I wanted to ask you, Rajmohanji, to say a little bit more about what the roots were of, Mahatma Gandhi's absolute commitment to the equality of members of different religious communities. Who you made a reference to Hind Swaraj, which was, of course, written in South Africa. And even there, long before he came back to India and launched the non-cooperation movement based on the equality and unity of Hindus and Muslims, he had discovered something about how to respect differences, and on the basis of that, to build unity. Would you want to say a little bit more about
Sure.
what was deep inside the Mahatma?
So, as you know, Sugata, you also have read the literature about Gandhi and even his childhood and his boyhood and his older years. He has he recalled in the late 40s, before he was killed, 2 or 3 times he recalled his boyhood in Rajkot. And he expressly says this was before the INC was formed, so it was before 1885, that he had a passion to see in India where the Hindus and the Muslims and the Christians and the Parsis, he always referred to the Parsis, because they were a part of Western India, and the Sikhs, that they would all live in unity. That this was his dream even as a boy. And then, as people know who have studied Gandhi's life, when he was in London as a student, between the ages of 18 and 21, he befriends people in the Majlis. He befriends Muslims in England at the time. And of course, the person who gave him a job in South Africa, what took him to South Africa as a 23-year-old young lawyer, he was a Muslim gentleman. And so his initiation into South Africa was at the hands of this Muslim family from Gujarat. And then in his subsequent 20 years or so in South Africa, he had fantastic Muslim and Hindu and Christian colleagues and comrades. So the in whatever, even when he wrote letters to various people in connection with his campaigns, he was always emphasizing the all-inclusive nature of his team. Like Netaji's army, the INA, Gandhi's volunteer armies in South Africa had always Muslims, Hindus, Christians, Hindus from different backgrounds, different linguistic backgrounds. So there was that passion in him from the very start.
Yes, thank you very much. And, I was having a conversation with your brother, Gopal Krishna Gandhi, a few weeks ago. And we talked about how, even when he was in jail for the first time in Johannesburg, he would read the Gita at dawn, the Quran at midday, use the Bible to give lessons to a fellow Christian convict. I'd like to turn to Anita Auntie. Netaji's was a life of sacrifice, and both your mother and you also had to sacrifice a lot. Netaji left on his submarine voyage when you were just 2 months old, and Abid Hassan, whom I mentioned, was his only Indian companion on that perilous 90-day voyage. And of course, I haven't seen Netaji, who died in 1945. But, both of us have had the good fortune of meeting the men and women who worked very closely with Netaji. And, just as you referred to Rajmohanji as your brother, and, all of the members of the Gandhi family are our close relatives. So also, in a sense, the Azad Hind family probably is a very sort of close family. Perhaps our bonds with them could be even greater than the blood relationships that we have. And I thought that, could you sort of talk a little bit about how you learned about the forging of unity among Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, talking to men and women who worked closely with Netaji later on?
As you mentioned, both of us did not live during the periods that Gandhiji and Netaji were active, or our lives overlapped very little. But I think whenever I was in touch with members of the INA or with other members of the independence movement, I always had the very clear feeling that for them and also for Netaji, it had been a very close relationship in a way. I always felt that they are as much his family as we Boses are their family. And when people sort of started pointing out the differences between Gandhiji and Netaji and sort of tried to sort of emphasize an enmity between them, it always felt very strange to me, because of course I don't know that from him firsthand, but from my mother I know how strongly my father respected Gandhiji and looked upon him as a father. And we have to keep in mind that these men and women of the independence movement were exceedingly dedicated to a cause which took so many years and decades. And it was not at all clear when they would be successful eventually. But they had this complete dedication, and even though they may have differed on some issues as to how to go about things, their common goal was always, I think, paramount and the most important for them. And the dedication they had for their country also very clearly made all their countrymen and countrywomen, particularly those who were in the independence movement, their family. More so than, I would say, some of their blood relations who were not as dedicated as they were. And I have a feeling that Mahatma Gandhi maybe was in a very similar frame of mind, even though he may have been a bit more strict and with Tyson and in the earlier stages. I must say, I always felt there was a great tragedy in his life insofar that at the time when India became independent, that certainly was not the form of independence that he had envisaged. And in a way, I think he was even a greater example possibly to people throughout the world who were involved in all sorts of emancipatory movements, who took him as their leader, and yet his own countrymen and countrywomen, or some of them who had a important position at the time, sort of went along with the idea of partition, even though he was opposed to it, and even though he had been in a very strong position and sort of could always call their obedience, so to say, at that stage, I felt it terribly tragic that he was sort of almost left alone. I have often asked this question, but I'll pose this to Rajmohanji because it's a question about that period of partition. Now, my view is that the differences of 1939 often get hugely exaggerated, and it was a fleeting, certainly a very temporary parting of the ways. And it seems to me that Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose came very close in their aims and ideologies, certainly from 1942 onwards, once Gandhiji launched the Quit India movement. Did Mahatma Gandhi miss his rebellious son?
Oh, very much so. My God, yes. Mahatma Gandhi missed him. India missed him. If only Netaji Subhash Bose had been in India at that time, who knows? The history of India and Pakistan, Bangladesh might have been so very different. But it is a fact that in 47, as my sister Anita points out, my young sister, so I need not even add G to it, I can call her Anita. So in 47, when Gandhi opposed partition till the very end, Patel was strongly in favor of it. Nehru was in favor of it. Rajgopalachari was in favor of it. Rajan Babu was in favor of it. Maulana Azad was unhappy about it, but he never made an issue of it. He kind of went quiet. The only one who supported Bapu at that time was Khan Abdul Ghaffar Khan. And then I think many also know of Gandhi's ingenious and idea of Jinnah being the prime minister of a united India. And that in the legislature, the Congress would, despite being in a majority, would support Jinnah. But the proposal was not even put to Jinnah because Patel and Nehru and everybody else opposed it. But I agree with you that if only Subhash had been present, unity might have carried the day and partition might have been averted. But you know, those ifs and might have beens of history are very important. But maybe we should recognize that, you know, reality were as they were. Subhash, Netaji had left us tragically and bravely and courageously. And so he was not there. And Gandhi was alone. And when Gandhi found that the bulk of India was in favor of partition, he felt he had to yield. And then he supported the people who had opposed him, Patel, Nehru, Rajaji, and the others. And he helped the new leadership, even though they had rebelled against him, to launch Free India as a nation for all. I repeat, perhaps even more, after all, the independence of India, the INA played a tremendous part, Netaji played a fantastic part, the people of India played a fantastic part, but World War II played a fantastic part. So the independence of India was coming, and it came. But the launching of Free India as a nation for everybody was not automatic. That is not what world events were going to ensure. That happened despite the trends of hatred and revenge. It was a phenomenal achievement in 47, 48, 49. And so we should not forget that, and today is a terrible situation. But the situation in India, in Delhi in 47, was just as people wanted Delhi to become a purely Hindu city and all the Muslims should be eliminated. That was the plan. But that final fast to which you referred put an end to that plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So how to now? So if I may say, since you're giving me this chance, I'll say one more thing, changing the subject a bit to today and tomorrow. What Anita mentioned earlier about the people of the world today, and even referring to the latest war now, which has produced so much terrible hardship in the whole wide world. Now is the time, I humbly submit, for the people of India. I'm not referring to governments now, not the government of Pakistan, not the government of India. The people of Pakistan, the people of India, the people of Bangladesh, the people of Japan, and the people of China. I'm not referring to Xi Jinping and the other. The people of these countries, Vietnam, Asia, have to come together in a courageous way and find the greater unity which we lost in 47, partially regained in 47, 48, 49. We're now losing it. But now, with what is happening in the whole world, with the convulsion taking place, everyone is asking fresh questions. China seems to be asking some questions. I'm sure in Pakistan too. But now is the time for the spirit of Netaji, the spirit of Gandhi. And I would also add here, as I think many will agree, the spirit of Jawaharlal Nehru also. And I would add of Vallabhbhai Patel and Maulana Azad, that we could now recreate a bond of the humble people of the world to do something on education, to do something on environment, away from armaments, away from bombs, away from killings. And let the people of South Asia, the people of all of Asia, take the lead now to create a better world.
I entirely agree with that exhortation. I will now be guided by the organizers. Time is running short, and we probably should allow our very patient audience to pose some questions. But I see a little bit of difficulty on the chat because it has become very full.
No, actually, we have been facing the trolling and other things. Unfortunately, I stopped. I blocked the chat, and I blocked actually further entry. At least 15, 20 people. I'm not sure with different names they are entering or what. So there is a continuous problem. So that has been taken care of. So now, within this 15 minutes, remaining 15 minutes, Dr. Rafat Hussain, who moderates this section for audience, he will moderate it and he will invite people to ask you questions. And I may say that since time is short, and there are many hands raised, those who are putting questions, just put the questions. No brief speeches, nothing, because we are short of time. So please ask brief questions, and response should be also very brief. Rafat, please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Razi Bhai, and thank you, Professor Gandhi, Professor Faf, Professor Bose, and Mr. Tripathi. So before I go for question and answer session, I give an opportunity to Tripathi ji if he wants to make a brief comment or a quick question.
Yeah, sure. Two things. One, Professor Gandhi or Professor Bose, anybody who likes to answer it. What do you think went wrong for the situation we are in today in India? Do you think that Gandhi and Bose, we revere them, but we don't read about them, we don't talk about them, we don't follow them. That's why the situation is where we are in today. Because if you see in last 2 decades, there is a growing tendency, a growing argument that Gandhi and Bose were rivals. Every 23rd January, we hear that it was because of Bose and INA, we got independence, it was not because of Gandhi. We are discussing this, we are not discussing what was common in them. And second, can you please throw some light on when Gandhiji was in Noakhali and Bihar? I think the INA men were also with him
Yes, sir.
all the time. So can you please throw some light on that?
Shugato.
Well, I think that there is a fringe, I would say, which is constantly tries to pit Gandhiji and Netaji against each other. But I think what they shared in common far outweighs any differences in tactics that they might have had in 1939. I come from Bengal, and I know that there is a strand of Bengali opinion that exaggerates what happened in 1939. But, I grew up listening to my father telling me how he first met Mahatma Gandhi in the autumn of 1937, when Gandhiji came to live as a guest in my grandfather Sharad Bose's home. And he had the good fortune of being introduced to Mahatma Gandhi by none other than Subhash Chandra Bose. And he could see, and he always told me, how he came to appreciate the greatness of the man who was the leader of our country. I grew up with my mother telling me that when Mahatma Gandhi went on fast in 1943, she as a 12-year-old kept a fast for a day. And then when she was 15 years old, she wanted a charkha as a birthday present. So that is the environment in which I have sort of grown up, and I have always appreciated the close bond between Mahatma Gandhi and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. When we talk about the INA fighting in Imphal, the brigade of the 1st Division of the INA, commanded by Muhammad Zaman Kiani, which fought so heroically for our freedom, was named the Gandhi Brigade. And so there was mutual respect and affection. And maybe just as we should really try to promote a people's movement, not just in India, but across Asia at this moment of crisis. So also as citizens, we probably ought to speak out in very clear fashion, pointing out that how both of these great men, and also the galaxy of leaders that Raj Mohanji has referred to, believed in the values of equality and unity.
Thank you so much. And so, as Razi Bhai said, that chat is disabled because of some uncivilized behavior, you can say. So, you have to please raise your digital hand. And I have already 10 people lined up. So my request is, as Razi Bhai said, should be very brief, and the same humble request to all the speakers, please be brief in your response. And and it will be nice if the questioner can ask a specific question to the specific speaker, so we can save some time. And if you can point your question directly to the speaker. specific speaker. So next person is Fazal Khan, and after that Imtiaz Khan. So please be ready. Fazal Khan sahab. Fazal bhai, unmute yourself. No, we don't hear you.
Unmute yourself. Okay.
Okay, good to go.
Yes, please ask.
Yes. So first, thank you for this lecture. Excellent. Actually, it's a subject of class teaching. And for me, it is overwhelming to see the descendants of two great leaders that India had produced. It is really overwhelming to see you. And to me, Netaji and Gandhiji were leaders. Now we have politicians, not leaders in India. It's a huge difference between those two, and nobody knows better than you two. This topic, it's a vast subject with the enormous implications. Only question I have, and I'm not sure who to address this to, what I have heard from majority community, that India has been ruled for thousands of years by anybody other than Hindus, which is the majority in India. Now is the time for Hindus to rule. So how do you reconcile that? Because that is seeped into everybody's mind. So how do you reconcile that?
I think Rajmohanji has already said in his remarks how Gandhiji viewed Indian history. And I would simply refer you and also the younger generation of South Asians to Subhash Chandra Bose's book, The Indian Struggle, where he makes it crystal clear that throughout the period of Mughal rule, for example, it was a joint Hindu and Muslim administration. And as was the case during the Nawabi in Bengal. And Gandhiji was fond of saying that any Hindu-Muslim conflict was coeval with the British advent in India. And Subhash Chandra Bose wrote in the Indian Struggle that Indians first began to feel conquered once British colonial rule was established. So I think all serious scholars and students of history completely reject the rhetoric of Narendra Modi about a millennium of Hindu servitude. It simply does not accord with any impartial inquiry into the history of India.
Thank you so much. And I just warn you that the list has swelled to almost 18 people. So our next person is Imtiaz Sahab. And please ask the question, a direct question. If you begin the commentary or the background, I will interrupt you. Sorry about that. So please ask the question. Thank you. Imtiaz Sahab and then Rudranshu. Imtiaz Sahab, please unmute yourself. And Rudranshu, please be ready. And after that, Nazir Ahmed. Okay. So go ahead, Rudranshu, please. Imtiaz Sahab is not there. Unmute yourself. I already said, please. Go ahead.
Sir, my question is to Professor Rajmohan Gandhi, that how would Gandhiji react to the current trollish culture had he been alive today, which has been propped up at the behest of the BJP right now? Even I see you are heavily trolled for your articles you write on NDTV and various platforms.
Thank you, Rudranshu. That's how the question should be asked.
That is perfectly true. That is a reality today. Anybody who fights for truth, for equality, for tolerance, is trolled. But that is life. Most people are most welcome to do that. As Gandhi used to say, the only tyrant I obey is the still small voice within. The only tyrant I will obey is the still small voice within. And ekla chalo re. Let there be 1 million people who troll against me. I will obey what my heart says is right. One more thing I will say. It is not a question of finding out where Gandhi was right, where Gandhi was wrong, where Netaji was right, where Netaji could have done even better, where Nehru is wrong, etc., etc. The time has come now not for leaders, but for individuals, for so-called ordinary people. It is the age of the individual courageous activist. You know how many amazing reporters today courageously reporting what is happening? Women, how many brilliant, courageous, fearless women are fighting? Humble people, Dalit women, Muslim women, all across India. This is not the time to count votes, not the time to count numbers, followers, WhatsApp followers, Twitter followers. This is the time for courageous action by a handful, and a handful of minority who have the right ideas will turn the tide of history. That was certainly Netaji's view. That was Gandhiji's view. Even if it was not their view, it is my view. It is my view. A handful of ordinary people, courageous enough, brave enough, will resist this tide in the world.
Thank you, Professor. Imtiaz Saab, are you back?
Yes, thank you. I could not unmute myself before. Do you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead, please.
Good.
Ask the.
Yeah, Rajmohan Bhai has given a very good suggestion. And my question is, how can a divided community like the Muslims of India have a successful demonstration? We know that for CA there was a sustained demonstration, but the Muslim community in India is very divided and totally unaware of the dangers they are facing. So what is the suggestion for them?
Thank you.
ये किसको सवाल पूछ रहे हैं आप?
आप ही बता दें.
Well, Professor Sugata Bose and Rajmohan Bhai both can answer this one.
Sugata ji, please.
I think that we should accept that Hindus are not a monolithic community. So also Muslims are not a monolithic community. And if there are differences, these can be expressed in both articulate and civilized ways. And it's best, not to think in terms of these religious communities as being a given sort of from the past. However, I will say that when there is discrimination against a religious community, it is not only the members of that religious community who should speak up, but others should too. Muslims are not represented adequately in our legislatures, including, the Lok Sabha in 2014 and 2019. And that is because the ruling party does not even offer nominations to those who happen to be Muslims. And that's why in my maiden speech in Parliament in 2014, I looked around and I said that this Parliament is not as representative of India as it should be. In the United States, we often hear a phrase, does this particular institution look like America? And very often it does not. And so that is something that we ought to bear in mind. Maybe, even though this is becoming a longish answer, I should refer back to a rather obscure event where Subhash Chandra Bose, as Chief Executive Officer of the Calcutta Corporation, had appointed a large number of Muslims who were underrepresented way back in 1924. And he said that he would support what he said were the just claims of Muslims, Christians, and members of the depressed classes. And Mahatma Gandhi sprang to his defense in Young India. And this is what he wrote. I note that the Chief Executive Officer of the Calcutta Corporation has come in for a good deal of hostile criticism because of his having given 25 out of 33 appointments to Musalman. I have read the statement made by the Chief Executive Officer. It is a creditable performance. If Hindus wish to set India free, they must be willing to sacrifice in favor of their Musalman and other brethren. Now, both of them were directly addressing the problem of underrepresentation. And therefore, what I will say is that let there be differences among Muslims, let there be differences among Hindus, so long as they are respectfully expressed. But let us cross that particular religious boundary and let us not be afraid to speak for one another.
Thank you. Nazir Ahmad Saab and then Hassan Ghiyas Saab.
My question relates to the cabinet mission plan and Gandhiji's position on it. We all know the statement that was made by Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, the sequel, the positions that were taken by the Indian National Congress, the Muslim League, and the outcome of it. But the position of Gandhiji is somewhat fuzzy from a historical point of view. And the follow-on question would be, had Netaji been the president of the Indian National Congress at the time, rather than Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, he being more sensitive to the aspirations of the Muslims, would the outcome have been different?
Thank you.
Rajmohanji, would you like to take a first?
Sure, I'll try to answer the first question. Yes, Gandhiji's position does seem a little difficult to fully understand. He was opposed to it. He did not like the plan because he did not like the double speak in the plan. The plan said one thing to the Congress, another thing to the Muslim League altogether. So there was complete double speak in the plan, and Stafford Cripps told House of Commons afterwards that we deliberately made it vague to get everybody to accept it. This is what Cripps said in House of Commons. But Gandhiji was unhappy with it. But the bulk of the Congress, so what happened in 46 was a precursor of what would happen a year later. Gandhiji did not like the plan, but the leaders were very keen on it. And so Gandhiji accepted it. Just as later, a year later, the others were very unhappy about it. You see, so Gandhi knew that the people who were going to run the country were Nehru, Patel, and the others. And he was perfectly, despite his unease, he was not able to do much about it.
Rajmohanji, I have a slightly different reading of Mahatma Gandhi's attitude towards the cabinet mission plan. At first, he was quite hostile. For example, on the 8th of May, 1946, he actually said that grouping was, quote, really worse than Pakistan, unquote. But then, after a very careful perusal of the 16th May cabinet mission statement, he, I think, rose above the usual nationalist suspicion of British perfidy to give a more measured opinion on the 20th of May. And he said that it was, quote, the best document the British could have produced under the circumstances. And when he was opposing partition of Punjab and Bengal, he, I think, was falling back on the cabinet mission plan. But what I would say about the second part of the question is that we should understand that anti-colonial nationalists, including Deshabandhu Chittaranjan Das, Subhash's political guru, and Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose, had for a very long time spoken about India being an independent federal republic. And the anti-colonial visions of federalism, respecting difference, were much more far-sighted than a British plan that was sort of produced in 1946. Even though I think it's probably true to say that the cabinet mission plan of the three-tiered sort of constitutional structure would have been one possible way of averting partition along religious lines at that time.
Thank you. Hassan Ghayas Saab and then Sayyid Amir Saab. Hassan Ghayas Saab.
The question is to Professor Shugato Bose. Is the resurgence of totalitarianism that we see in the world today because the lessons of World War II have been forgotten?
That's a very large question. I think the lessons of World War II were in fact remembered for a very long time in Europe, and so it was possible to form the European Union. France and Germany, which had fought against each other in two world wars, could still sort of coexist and cooperate under the umbrella of European Union. I would say that in many ways, I think the lessons were learned. Now, of course, we have a very, very difficult moment. There is, in fact, a full-scale war going on in Europe, even as we speak. My sense is that it's not so much that the lessons of the Second World War have been forgotten, but that there has been in the 21st century a movement, against the democratizing processes that had taken place in many parts of the world. And that is why those who were privileged feel threatened, those who had been privileged. And therefore, they are falling back on ethnic majoritarianism, racial superiority, in the case of India, religious majoritarianism. And I would also say something else, that unfortunately, the promises of secularism and socialism were not kept. They became empty slogans by the late 20th century. They need to be reinvested with new meaning. And that is why I think that we have this drift, certainly towards authoritarianism, and you are using a stronger term, totalitarianism.
Thank you. I just wanted to remind there are 11 people still lined up. Sayyid Amir Saab and then Ranbir Banerjee Saab. Sayyid Amir Saab.
Thank you. Thank you, this very distinguished panel. I spent my growing years in India, and one thing I'm mystified now is that there wasn't all that much information about Netaji Bose. We knew very little. I mean, even his death remained a mystery for a long time, and I'm not sure. The second question is that I would like to tempt you to speculate if Netaji had stayed in India rather than going to out of India in the 40s, would have he been a rival to Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru, or he would have been a supporter of his ideals, or his form, the way he governed?
Thank you, Amir.
May I ask, try an answer to that? I think a bit of both. I think there was a lot of common thinking in Pandit Nehru and Netaji, they were both in favor of a secular political system. They were both leftists. They were both, for those days, relatively modern. So in a sense, they would have been, on the one hand, the logical team to work together. On the other hand, of course, that would also make them rivals to some extent. And the fact that you say there was not much talk about Netaji was maybe an expression, ex post facto, of that, not so much Jawaharlal Nehru himself, but maybe the people around him, sometimes I would call them the minions around him, sort of tried to enforce a narrative claiming that it was only the non-violence movement which led to independence. So I think if they had lived together in India after independence, quite conceivable that they might have been rivals. On the other hand, if you look at the political spectrum of parties, in essence, their program was very similar. They certainly would both be opposed to what is going on in terms of Hindu nationalism today.
Thank you. Thank you, Ranbir Banerjee Saab, and then Lalita ji. Ranbir Banerjee Saab, go ahead.
Yes. My question is to Professor Bose, Sugata Bose. This is in regards to pre-independent India, when we found out in Calcutta, especially Bengal Provincial Congress, when Subhash Bose raised the issue about Hindu Mahasabha and Muslim League, both not to give them vote, or they cannot be part of Indian National Congress, coming from a region Hindutva background or Muslim background, they should not be entertained. And even he has made a statement where he has urged people not to vote against him. Do you think that a religious aspect bringing into Indian politics, does that bring down the morale of the politics and the politicians of our country?
Thank you.
As has been made quite clear by my fellow panelists, Subhash Chandra Bose believed in the equality of all of the religious communities of India. This question of the relationship with the Hindu Mahasabha and the Muslim League is a complex one. In 1938, as president of the Indian National Congress, he was certainly, opposed to the Hindu Mahasabha, gaining ground. On the other hand, in 1940, there was a time when the Calcutta Corporation was jointly run by the Bose wing of the Indian National Congress and the Muslim League. In fact, we see the photograph of the Muslim League mayor, Abdur Rahman Siddiqui, sitting with him in his bedroom when he was kept under close watch in this house in December 1940, before his escape in January of 1941. But he definitely was a very strong critic of Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, who was in some ways a minor figure at that time compared to others in Bengal. And also, if you read the Indian struggle, he is quite critical of Savarkar, who he says is completely oblivious about the international situation. And he says that he's only interested in getting Hindus to join the British Indian Army to get military training, when Netaji's objective was radically different, quite the opposite. He wanted to destroy the loyalty of Indian soldiers to the British King Emperor and win them over to the cause of Indian independence. So I think his political position was, crystal clear at that time, just before the war and as the Second World War broke out.
Thank you. Lalita ji and then Rajkumar. Lalita ji, please go ahead.
Rafat, quickly move to others. You
Yeah, yeah. Rajkumar ji. Rajkumar ji.
Hello.
Okay, yes.
Yes, sorry, I was unmuted, so I was on mute, sorry, and you've just unmuted me, so
Yeah,
thank you.
that's why I asked
Yes.
everyone to unmute in advance.
Yes, thank you so much. And this is a question for actually all the panelists, if whoever wants to address it. So one of the talking points you hear here in the diaspora, particularly from the majority, is that one of the reasons that Gandhiji's views were considered as dangerous is that he was considering this corridor. This is, of course, post-partition between India and Pakistan. So the question is if you can shed light on this request by Jinnah for this corridor between the West and East Pakistan at that time. If you can just share with us the impact of that, and particularly what, why this would have compelled then the, let's say, the right-wing forces to react against Gandhiji. Thank you.
Well, so many lies are these days spread about Gandhiji. This is another one. In fact, I had not heard of it, but since you mentioned it, there is absolutely no evidence of any kind at all known to me. There may be elsewhere, absolutely none, of Gandhi giving the slightest encouragement to the idea of a corridor. And not even sure that the corridor idea, which was certainly raised by Jinnah, it was dismissed out of hand by everybody in India. And I'm not even sure that Jinnah actively pursued it. In fact, I think it was mentioned even before partition was accepted. I'm not aware that Jinnah pursued the idea. Certainly, there's no evidence that Gandhiji backed it.
Thank you. Srinath Saab and then somebody by name Galaxy. Srinath Saab.
Thank you, Rafat Saab. So I have three questions. One for Anita, Ram Mohan Gandhi, and Sujat Bose. So first, I'll go with Anita. I am kind of a younger generation compared to most of the panelists and the guests here. So one of the criticism what I often hear is the early governments of India after independence have kind of not given enough prominence to Subhash Chandra Bose compared to other leaders who have participated in the independence. So, I mean, I think it kind of also reflects kind of a recent movie where it says Subhash Chandra Bose, the forgotten hero, right? So do you also, what's your thought, and do you reflect those kind of views, or what is your comment on those? That's for Anita. And for Rajmohan Gandhi Saab, so what we have been seeing in the last 10 years is kind of a right-wing nationalism being increasing in not just India, but also in US, UK, and Australia, all during a similar time period. What is the kind of commonality among those, and why is this happening across nations? That's for you, sir. And for Sugata Bose, since you are from Bengal, and this is more from the partition times, I mean, I'm from Hyderabad, and our before ruler Nizam, he wanted to join Pakistan, and obviously the people of Hyderabad wanted to be part of India, and that's when Hyderabad became part of India, right? So, and also the leaders envisioned there should not be. I'll be quick, Rafat Saab.
And can we compromise on two questions, because three questions per person?
This is something I want to know, because it could have avoided an India war with Pakistan. Because I mean, I want to know kind of a view why the leaders have allowed a East Pakistan and a West Pakistan of the same country. I mean, they could have done for different countries and could have avoided a war with India. I mean, India war. Haven't they foreseen that kind of friction between the countries being sandwiched between a same country? Thank you, sir, for the opportunity.
Yeah, please be brief, because I was not expecting three questions from one person.
Let me start and try to make it short. I think to some extent the early governments did not recognize Netaji's contribution as much. I think there is a point to that. And it may have two reasons, in my opinion. On the one hand, they, of course, wanted to establish themselves as the new leaders in free India and get their own legitimacy, especially also from their predominant contribution to India's independence. The other thing is many of the documents were not open as yet. And when the documents, the confidential documents became declassified after many of them after 30 years, some as we know later, and then some of the evidence became available to the public that in fact the Indian National Army, not as a military movement, but maybe as a political movement in the sense, if you think of the Red Fort trials and the mobilization of the sentiments of the Indian public, was greatly affected by this mobilization. And in that sense, I think it also was the fact that the Navy and the armed forces in general started to mutiny and oppose the British rule that was important, and that definitely was more clearly inspired by the INA, not military success, because ultimately it was a military defeat, but I think the INA had a political success in that sense. And that, but the proof of that was available only somewhat later.
Thank you.
So the recent years have seen great problems all over the world. Political parties were not able to solve the problems created by globalization. And globalization did many good things, but it hurt many people in different ways. So people rallied around this supremacy idea that we whites have been badly treated, we Hindus have been badly treated, and so forth. These ideas became popular because of a great number of problems. The other common thing in many countries was that those opposed to the ideas of supremacy, those still wanting equality and democracy, could not work together. They had personal differences, maybe some political differences. They have not had the statesmanship to come together. Even today, even in today's India, even in today's UP, the BJP did not get 50% of the votes. Those who are opposed to the right-wing groups still have the majority vote, but they're not able to come together. And this failure of pro-democratic individuals, pro-democratic parties, anti-authoritarian parties, pro-tolerance parties, for them to come together is a common story in many countries. But we hope before long that will change.
Very briefly, Netaji's elder brother, Sharat Chandra Bose, tried very hard until almost the very end to prevent the partition of Bengal along religious lines. And his plan for a united Bengal was initially supported by Mahatma Gandhi, by the way, by Muhammad Ali Jinnah. And as late as 28th May 1947, Mountbatten had recorded 2 alternative broadcasts in London, and one of which, broadcast B, suggested that the Hindus and Muslims of Bengal had come to an understanding and that only Punjab would be a candidate for partition. But the Congress High Command, Nehru and Patel, were not prepared to concede the Bengal exception. At that stage, they were keen to take power at a strong center and let the Muslim majority areas opt out. And that is why on the 3rd of June, the partition plan was broadcast. This is a complex story, but I've written about it elsewhere, which you might want to read.
Sorry, sir. If I may interrupt.
No.
My question is more towards why there was a East Pakistan and West Pakistan of the same country, and not about the partition. Why was it like a?
So let's move on. And my dear panel, that we have come close to 1 o'clock now, the US time. So I just wanted to, this is my duty to ask you guys how many more questions you want to take, or we should stop here, because there are
only one question. Can I ask a question? Only one question. It will be brief.
Go. Hold on, please.
Yeah, please let us.
Galaxy Saab, I will give you a chance. So hold on.
Me too,
let me ask the panel how long they wanted to stay, because our assigned time is almost over. So please let us know. You want to go 5 more minutes, or you want to stop now, whatever you decide. Your choice. And thank you so much for staying so long. At least it's very long in India, late hours in India.
Shall we wind up in 5 minutes? Would that be?
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Okay, Galaxy Saab, if you want your question to be answered, be very brief.
I'll be very brief. I'm from UNESCO Institute of Cooperation, and I just wanted to know, it's not about history, but Gandhiji wanted Ambedkar sir to be the draftsman of the Constituent Assembly. But in recent times, the Ambedkar's family has been incarcerated. Anand Teltumbde sir and his husband and his brother has been killed. What is your opinion on this? That's all. Nothing else. Thank you.
Well, I know that Anand Teltumbde and many other people, intellectuals who are trying to help the situation, have been in detention for 3 years without any trial. This is a story in many parts of India, and it's a very unfortunate story. And we should spread word about this, that in supposedly democratic India, this sort of thing is happening.
Thank you.
Okay, my next question. My question.
No. Thank you.
Hey, last one.
No,
you said 5 minutes did not happen. Here is my question, please. So we know the differences between Vallabhbhai Patel and Bose. Bose was very close to Vithalbhai Patel ji. And then my question is, in the 1939 elections, even Nehru and Bose were very close in the 1920s and the 30s. So in the 1939 election, did Bose has support of Nehru?
So,
Nehru was hedging in a way. He did not support Netaji clearly, but he also did not oppose him clearly.
He was neutral. Nehru was neutral then.
How neutral was he? He has to vote, right?
They agreed on many political issues, but in essence, since Gandhiji was opposed to some of the issues, I don't have the time to go into the details, but Nehru was not willing to oppose Gandhi.
Thank you.
No. If you're riding 2 horses.
Okay,
he was the great father of all these sons, after all.
Okay, Saravant Saab, that would be probably last question. Saravant, and my sincere apologies to those who I couldn't entertain those questions. There are 5-6 more people lined up. I'm so sorry. Saravant Saab, that would be the last question.
Question again. So in 1945, when Bose died, right? Why was there a delay in accepting the fact that he's no more? Because it is very evident in Taiwan whatever happened, and how can we stop Bose being used by the Hindu fundamentalist groups, and especially when the other person who was traveling with Bose in the flight was a Muslim?
Netaji always had important supporters and seconds in command, or people who accompanied him who were Muslims, and the fact that they were Muslims was very important to him, particularly Abid Hassan, for example, who called himself Safrani also. Netaji said, why do you have to call yourself Safrani? Because Abid Hassan was a more obviously Muslim name. So that was always important. And don't forget, Netaji grew up in a part of India which was predominantly Muslim. And I think it is quite remarkable that he did not end up with a chip on the shoulder because of that, but on the other hand, embraced this Hindu and Muslim culture very much so.
And why his death was not
I think we should stop, Mr.
Okay, thank you. And just to recognize those who wanted to ask the questions, Sachin Saab, Rajesh Mishra, Anubhav Pal, Nahid Verma, Pankaj, and Ravi Shankar. So that tells you that the interest in the topic, and there were like 20 people who wanted to ask the question. So thank you, everyone. Thank you, the panelists. It was a wonderful talk and a great discussion. And back to Razi Bhai. And thank you once again.